Hello, everyone, and welcome back finally to the next episode of the Runaway Sports Podcast, your favorite podcast covering Purdue sports. We took a solid couple of weeks, a reprieve once the original announcement of the Big Ten fall sports being officially postponed by the Big Ten, as I think we all needed some time to reflect and cool down on the news, as well as be a little disappointed in the news. So we ended up taking a couple weeks break after beginning preparations for the fall season that now no longer will be taking place. But with that said, I am back. I am more refreshed than ever, and I hope that you are ready for some more Boiler in Texas content, because it is going to be coming at you. This is going to be a relatively shorter podcast, as there hasn't been a whole lot of news over the last few weeks, at least not necessarily in Big Ten land. There has been some things happening in other conferences, as well as some small tidbits here and there that keep resurfacing every few days or so. So my plan for this episode is, one, talk about kind of the next steps for the blog, for the podcast, where we see it going over the next few weeks. And obviously all of this is going to be in flux, and nothing is absolutely set in stone or anything. So we're going to be taking it one step at a time, just like everyone else. But here are some initial plans and ideas as to what is going to be happening on boilerintexas.com over the next few weeks. We did, like I mentioned, we took a bit of a hiatus, a bit of a reprieve to be a little disappointed and grieve a little bit, I think is probably the best way to put it, for the fall season for Purdue football. And since then it's been a nice time to step away a bit. I think it's easy to get a little bit wrapped up in social media and everything that's going on in the world, and so taking a bit of a step back in that news and taking some personal time is never a bad thing. But now we're back, we're more refreshed, and we're ready to speculate, like everyone else in the sports world, about what is going to happen going forward. So current plans for the blog and for this podcast, I plan on going back to weekly episodes, covering kind of the next steps and current status of what's going on in the Big Ten. There has been, and we'll cover this a little bit more in detail in our second segment, but there has been some talks of reevaluating the decision made by the Big Ten about a month ago, as well as outside influences that have permeated the decisions, as well as more information that has come to light about that initial decision, and we'll touch on that a bit. So weekly podcasts will be coming back, so be excited and on the lookout for those. And then in terms of written items, those will probably be fewer and far between as we go, at least in terms of fall sports. We may create a running updatable blog post that will kind of house all of the updates that we see from that front. But in the meantime, until we have more of a concrete plan, I think the idea is to swing back more towards the winter sports and kind of start getting preparations made for covering winter sports and more importantly, basketball, women's basketball, and kind of looking more to the future and getting the site and materials ready for that. And obviously, if anything were to change in terms of fall sports or decisions were made, we will pivot as necessary. But for now, I think that is the plan, at least for the written side. And that obviously would move over towards the podcast as well. And so be on the lookout for those. We're very excited to keep the content flowing. We began this blog, and by we, I mean I began this blog in the midst of all of this COVID-19 craziness in the world shutting down, and it seems only fitting that the Big Ten shuts down as the first major season of this blog's life comes to fruition. But we do what we can, and we will move forward accordingly. And if that means moving on to basketball, we will do that as necessary. So I'm back. This podcast is back. Be on the lookout for written articles. Those will be coming back to your inboxes and most social media platforms. And I am very excited to get back to it. It has been a nice break, but I have missed writing about our Boilermakers, even if it is a bit sad and disappointing in its current iteration. But that was just a quick touch on the current status of Boiler in Texas and our future here. We are going to take a very short break into this very young podcast episode, and when we come back, we'll kind of touch on some updates that we've seen over the last few weeks and what it means for the Big Ten and for Purdue going forward. Stay tuned. So the last we left off, I believe our final update on everything that was going on was on August 11th, when we released an update to our article about the Big Ten allegedly canceling the football season with confirmation that they had officially postponed the 2020 fall sports season. And it is amazing what can happen in just under a month, in about 3 weeks. From then, we saw obviously the very disappointing news that they were the first major conference to officially cancel fall sports. And I think that since then, obviously, the news has been disappointing, to put it lightly, across the conference. There was an alleged vote taken by various officials of each university that the details had not been confirmed nor really denied to its fullest extent, I guess we should say. But it was official that fall sports are no longer going to be taking place, and that was that. It was what it was, and we had to move on from there. And the backlash and the news that was coming out of each university, city, and town was interesting. Almost immediately, I guess we'll kind of take it in chronological order as it goes. Almost immediately, there were certain universities that were stating that they were contemplating ideas of playing outside the conference for 2020, potentially moving and playing a schedule outside of the Big Ten. Ohio State was a big proponent of that. Obviously, they are always looking to compete on the national stage, and not being able to do that obviously goes against what they're trying to do. So there was some news and rumors floating around that they were looking at potentially looking elsewhere to get their football fix in, but it only took the next day that they released a statement saying it would not seek to play outside of the Big Ten in 2020. They obviously that was probably if anyone was going to be looking to play outside of conference, Ohio State, I think, has the best case as compared to the next team we're going to talk about, which is Nebraska. Nebraska fans were probably the most vocal when it came to playing outside of the Big Ten to ensure that they saw some Nebraska football this year, at least in the fall. But once again, on 2 days after the official announcement, Nebraska also released a statement saying that they were committed to the Big Ten. I think that comes more based on the response from the Big Ten itself, saying that if Nebraska were to play outside of the Big Ten, that would be it, and there would be a lot of repercussions for them. And Nebraska apparently went even so far as Scott Frost, head coach of the Cornhuskers, to release a statement not necessarily ruling out the possibility of playing outside of the Big Ten. But Nebraska's AD, Bill Moose, stepped in pretty quickly and kind of squashed that idea. So it got a lot of heat over the next few days and a lot of media attention for sure, but the universities were pretty quickly able to release statements confirming that they were committed to the Big Ten and were not looking to play outside of conference. Then it was a relatively speaking, quiet next few days. Again, this is all within the first week of the announcement. And the next big piece of news was about August 16th, where Ohio State quarterback Justin Fields created a petition requesting the Big Ten to basically reverse their decision and allow teams to play within the safety protocols that had already been established. It circulated heavily around social media, and it got more than a few 100,000 signatures. I think it ended up being more than 300,000 signatures as of the 28th, I think was the last I saw. So that got a lot of traction and was shared around a lot on social media under the hashtag #WeWantToPlay. It's a petition started by players who wanted to, reaffirm their commitment to wanting to play this fall, wanting to commit to the safety precautions that have already been instated on the platform of, and this is where I kind of agree. There's a lot of dissidence on which side people fall in terms of the safety citation that seems to be going around about why college football was canceled. I fall on the side of, I believe, at least in terms of player safety, that the players being on campus with the team under their current safety protocols were probably safer than canceling the season or postponing the season, and sending the players home where those safety precautions aren't necessarily available to them. So that is one of the biggest points that I saw for playing, is that in terms of individual player safety and team safety, they believe that they probably were safer on campus with their teams rather than at home, where they have much less control over the situation. Now, in terms of competition, I think that was where there was still a lot of unknowns, and that obviously is one of the factors that played into this decision. So that, I think, was still, at least up to recently, quite a heavy talking point. And then look no further from there, moving forward just a single day, there is talk of, at least from Penn State's athletic director Sandy Barber, on the Big Ten's vote, and they're quoted saying, "It is unclear to me whether or not there was a vote. No one's ever told me there was. I just don't know whether there actually was a vote by the chancellors and presidents," end quote. Now, this was a bombshell that flew through the social media world almost immediately, because the implications of this was that the Big Ten, without essentially consulting any of the universities, without consulting any of the programs, decided on its own to cancel the season and pull out the rug from every university in the conference, with no conversation, no debate, no laying of the facts. They just had up and decided of their own accord that this was what was happening, and no one was involved. And if this was true, this puts the Big Ten in about as bad of light as you possibly can. And with this rumor floating around, I think for a few days, without any statement from the Big Ten, it felt clearer and clearer that this may have been the case. And if it was the case, oh boy, that would have been some backlash that the Big Ten would be recovering from for probably more than a few years. Thankfully, as we'll get to later, that isn't the case. There was a vote, but we'll get there when we get there, because there are a lot of things that happened in between then and now. Starting with August 21st, a group of 8 Nebraska football players threatened to sue the Big Ten on the grounds of wanting to play football. They wanted to sue the Big Ten, forcing the conference to release any documentation they had relating to the conference's decision to postpone the 2020 football season. So they wanted more clarity. They wanted more, clearly more facts and more ideas into what went into this decision, I'm assuming in hopes of debunking those facts and forcing the Big Ten to reverse their decision because they were able to overturn the facts, or at minimum by releasing the documents they would get more clarity on what exactly went into the decision, and if they find the facts obviously deemed valid, then obviously that provides a little more closure in regards to the decision. And currently, as it stood, there still wasn't a whole lot of clarity as to why the ultimate decision of why the Big Ten ended up deciding to trying to close the season. So, and it only keeps going. There are obviously some larger breaks now as people have started to, accept the fact that the Big Ten had canceled, and it did not seem that there was much that we as fans could do to overturn this decision. But that did not mean that there weren't those who tried. A group of parents of players in the Big Ten penned a letter to the Big Ten Commissioner, Kevin Warren, trying to express, a displeasure in Warren's handling of this matter without, the lack of clarity. And they quoted a total lack of confidence in his ability to lead and communicate effectively. And that is an indictment in itself, as Kevin Warren has only been Big Ten Commissioner, I think not even for a full calendar year at this point. So that is a little troubling to see. But I think the ultimate goal of the letter, again, as with the lawsuit from the Nebraska football players, was just they wanted more clarity. They wanted more transparency of the process they took to come to their decision. And they wanted to ensure that the Big Ten was doing all they could to make sure that the conference was doing everything it could to get football back on the field in the Big Ten, at least at some point as soon as they possibly can. And so from there, we move forward. There's more news comes out about the Nebraska players who sued the Big Ten. This was, I think this was only going to go so far as, actually going to court or anything. I think overall Nebraska players just doing what they thought was best to get more information. I think I've said it a lot, but I think the only thing anyone wanted in this entire previous month was more clarity on what was happening. Why was this decision made? Who made this decision ultimately? And what is the plan going forward? Because as of this moment, at least in terms of the calendar, there still wasn't a lot of that. And over the next few days past this lawsuit, I think more information started to come out about the plans from the Big Ten, about ideas that they were looking into, ideas they were circulating, and some potential courses of action. And it starts with August 28th when the reports came out of the Big Ten officially considering multiple potential start dates for the season, and then one that included the late fall. So there are a few plans that apparently are being in the works, and one date that has stood out probably among the most was, I think, Thanksgiving week, which I think in terms of schedule, I think that probably would be the earliest that the Big Ten could start in terms of getting players back on campus, ensuring their safety, and then also getting in enough on-field time to prepare for the season. So I think that could be interesting, and it would ensure that they would get to play some football in the fall and try and keep some form of normalcy in terms of the calendar schedule that college football athletes have to follow, as well, to ensure that they get enough rest after the season is ended. So I think Thanksgiving week is an interesting point and date to keep an eye out on. Some other potential dates that have come out are New Year's Day, mid-January, and then potentially sometime in early February. Nothing has been decided, obviously, but those are some potential dates that have been decided, or at least reported on as of now. So it seems as minimum it's going to be a late November all the way up to early 2021 start for Big Ten football. So it is not going to be a quote unquote normal season, and it is not going to follow a typical schedule in the slightest. So moving on, we have August 31st, not but a few days ago, we get official confirmation that the Big Ten did actually hold a vote whether or not to postpone the season. They had all Big Ten presidents and chancellors vote on whether or not to postpone the season, and the final vote ended up being with an 11-3 decision in favor of postponing the season. And it is nice to see that a vote was actually held, and it is nice to finally get some clarity on the decision on who voted for and who voted against. I don't know if we had official confirmation as to this part, but it seemed that the three votes against postponing the season came from Iowa, Nebraska, and Ohio State. I think the latter two are least surprising, as we saw the most pushback on postponing the season from these two programs, and I believe Iowa also kind of makes a lot of sense because it's Iowa, and they like football over there at Iowa. So I think those three schools kind of make a lot of sense, and it's nice to see a little bit of, in terms of going from the other side, it's nice to see some unification from the other 11 universities and I'll say universities, since it was the presidents and chancellors that voted. And it's nice to see some unity, and that it was not, what would be an 8-6 decision. As long as it wasn't that, I think that this provides a little bit of closure, as it wasn't close. It wasn't 8, like I said, it wasn't 8-6. It wasn't tied 7-7. It was a pretty decided decision, 11-3, to officially postpone the season. And that is most up to date as it can kind of be. Besides that, the only other real thing that has happened, and it pains me to kind of talk about it because I think it is a less than good-hearted and in the best light, but there has been talks of the president reaching out to Commissioner Kevin Warren about getting the season started immediately. And while I think that a lot of people would look at this as an indictment on the Big Ten, I think even with the president reaching out, I think this is still, far and away a less than likely alternative, with the amount of time it would take for the Big Ten to reevaluate the safety measures, reevaluate the safety protocols, put any new protocols in place, would take a fair bit of time in its own right. And then you have to look at the programs themselves. Most of them have been limited or extremely limited. I think I saw numbers in around that they are allowed up to about 12 hours on field time a week, and all non-contact skill-based work. So in terms of getting the programs prepared, and there are some programs I think that don't even have guys on campus anymore. And so I think the amount of time it would take to get guys back on campus, get them retested, get them quarantined if necessary, making sure that they have everything set up correctly to be as safe as possible before even being on the field. And then, not to mention, having probably at least a minimum of a few weeks, potentially up to a month, to actually prepare on field for the season. I think the likelihood that this comes to anything more than just press headlines is less than likely. And so I think at minimum, I think the date to keep an eye on is still that Thanksgiving week, to get things going, if at all possible, if it does happen. Other than that, I don't quite see, anything before then coming to fruition. So while we are not giving up hope for a fall season, I think probably the more likely start date will be sometime after New Year, and we'll play a shortened conference-only season more than likely to try and help keep the Big Ten in a normal, quote-unquote normal, college football schedule going forward. So I think that's kind of the thing to keep an eye on in terms of that. So, and that brings us up to today, up to the most recent news. I think it's been a long month. It has been a long year for everyone, and it is still far from over. I'm hoping we get fall football this year. I'm hoping we get football at all this year, and I'm hoping even more that basketball can be started on time as well. We haven't even touched on anything that's happening with that. I think we may touch on that a bit in next week's episode of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. But for now, I think that is actually going to wrap it up for us today. And we're glad to be back. We're glad that we finally have a little bit of clarity from the Big Ten regarding their decision to postpone the college football season. And we're excited to get the ball moving forward, whether that be in the spring or whether it be in late fall. But I think we're all ready for football to be back in some shape or form. But for now, I think that is going to wrap it up for us here. I hope you all have a great week. I hope you all stay safe. And as always, boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue. We'll see you next week.